السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى في شأن حبيبه إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات إنك على كل شيء قدير. صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. Today is the 23rd of this month of Rabiul Awwal, and as we've been talking about the last few weeks, this of course is the month of the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the month in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends His greatest blessing, the only blessing which He calls out in the Quran, to not just mankind but to all of creation. And He is not only the guide, but in reality He Himself is the guidance. He not only guides people to the straight path, but in reality He Himself is the straight path. Knowing Him, loving Him, accepting Him, honoring Him, respecting Him, all of these things are the essence of Iman. And there is no Iman without His love. There is no faith. There is no belief in Allah without the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone who claims that he believes in Allah but does not love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is a liar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in various places in the Quran. In Surah Tawbah and various other places He talks about this. The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that none of you is a believer unless he loves me more than he loves his forefathers, his parents, his offspring, his brothers, his kin, and all the wealth and everything in the universe, period. And so it's important to know Him and to understand, to know how to believe in Him. So there's a verse in the Quran which we alluded to last week, the last verse of Surah Kahf. So this is a surah that we're recommended to recite every Jummah, right? And the beginning of the verse is قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. So this is a declaration. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to His beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam, declare to them. And if you take the word for word translation of this, it would be that I am only a human similar to you, And it is revealed to me that my Lord and your Lord are one Lord. So the way this verse is presented to a lot of people, or rather the way a lot of people, and especially these days, present this verse, is that, see, he's only a human like us. And that's the extent of their explanation. See, he's like us. And what they're really wanting to say is, we're like him. Or rather, what they're really wanting to say is that they are like him. When you look at the verse itself, or the statement itself, one is, this is a declaration. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling his beloved sallallahu declare to them. If I look at language in itself, we are not accustomed to declaring things that are obvious. You don't ever see anybody saying, I do declare that water is wet. Or I'm really telling you that fire burns. These are things that you don't need any proof for. These are things that are obvious. These are things that, in essence, no one denies. So, the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is having him declare this statement in itself tells us a lot. It tells us that his bashariyat, or that his humanity, was not obvious. Because if it was obvious, then why does he need to declare it? And I'll explain this, as we go on. Again, we in conversation are not accustomed to declaring things that don't need any proof. If you're going to declare something, you can say something in passing, right? But to actually declare it or make a statement or emphasize it, that's a different issue. So the fact that he's having to declare this tells us that there's something different about him right at the beginning. That his humanity, in the sense that him being human, is not clear-cut. When we read the Quran, in Surah, in the Quran, when Ibrahim al-Islam is discussing or debating with Namrud, and he says to Namrud, because Namrud is saying that he's God, and he says to Namrud that if you are God, well, my God, he gives life and he gives death. If you are, then do the so. So he says, fine, no problem. He calls two prisoners, one of whom was supposed to be released and the other one was supposed to be executed. He had the one who was supposed to be released executed, and he had the one who was supposed to be executed released. He says, see, I do the same thing. Then Ibrahim al-Islam says, well, my Lord causes the sun to rise from the east. If you are God, then cause it to rise from the west. And here Namrud had no response. This is where the debate ended. Every prophet who came with miracles because they were challenged. So people wanted proof. And so they showed them miracles. The believer said, yes, this is the doing of the prophet under the authority of Allah. The disbeliever said, oh, this is the doing of the prophet, but this is magic. They both accepted that this is the doing of the prophet, except one said, oh, this is magic, and the believer said, oh, this is from the authority that Allah has given him. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Sayyidul Anbiya. He is the master of the prophets. So all of the other prophets, all of the miracles that they were given as specialities for them, were for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam common, something that was not a big deal for him. All the other prophets, their miracles were confined to this realm, to this world. If you look at the miracles of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they transcended time and space. They were not confined to this world. اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر, that the hour is close and the moon is split asunder. How was the moon split asunder? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam pointed to it and split it asunder. And not just a small gap, a gap so far that you could see part of it on one side of the mountain and the other part on the other side of the mountain. when Ali radiallahu misses his Asr, while he's in the service of Allah and His Messenger, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to the son, he commands the son, he says that Ali was in the service of Allah and His Messenger, so come back for him. And what happens? The son comes back from the west. If I look at the debate with Namrud and Ibrahim alayhi salam, this is where Namrud stopped. So if I look at the Quran superficially, then then technically Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, na'udhu billah, that he's a god, astaghfirullah, and he's not. We look at all the other miracles that he did. To the extent that one time an old Sahabiya, she comes to him and she says, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my son was my only son. He was my only child. He passed away. I have no other family. No husband, no father, no other children, no brothers, sisters, no one else. So either pray that I die and join him, because life is hard, or pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings him back. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is rahmatul alameen. He says, I will pray that Allah brings him back. So he goes to the graveyard and he says, Qum bi-iznillah. Like Isa alayhi salam used to do. Qum bi-iznillah, rise in the name of Allah. The whole graveyard stood up, because he didn't specify which one. And then he says to the rest of them, he says, no, this is only for him, the rest of you go back. When I look at the miracles of Isa alayhi salam, the 4 people that he raised from the dead, the Christians only know of 3, we Muslims, we know of 4. The 4 that he raised from the dead did not have any offspring after that. This companion of Rasulullah that he raised had offspring after this, had a lineage after that. So again, now when I start looking at these things, superficially I say, he's something different, which he is. But someone whose iman is weak, might go to the extent of saying, like the Christians did with Isa alayhi salam, gave him divinity. So here, this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making him make this declaration. Not that he's like us. Because when you look at comparisons, because they equate likeness to equality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say nafsukum, that he is the same as you. He says mithlukum, similar to you. When you look at mithl, the similitude, when you draw a similitude, like I say, his face is like the moon. No one ever says that this cat is like a cat. Or this tree is like a tree. Because the tree is a tree. The cat is a cat. When you draw a similitude, you have 2 different things. So when I say that, his face is like the moon, or he is tall like a tree, then it's understood that the reality of his face is different than the reality of the moon. Just like the reality of his tallness is not the same as the reality of a tree. The realities are different, but there's that comparison going on. So here when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says for Rasulullah, say, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ, that I am similar to you, then we should understand immediately that the reality of Rasulullah is not the reality of us. His reality is different than our reality. Otherwise he would have said that he is the same as you. Yeah, and this in general goes for every prophet, that the reality is not the reality of ours. And simple example from the Quran, Musa alayhi salam. The incident is in two places in the Quran, and you put them together, then you'll get what I'm talking about. Bani Israel say to Musa alayhi salam that we won't believe in your God, we want to see your God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Musa alayhi salam, fine, bring them. So he takes with him 70 of their finest scholars, 70 of their most elevated people. They go to the Tur, mountain of Tur, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives him a glimpse of something. And what happens with that glimpse, that flash? The whole mountain is burnt. Now, this should be obvious. If someone is standing on a stone and the stone becomes burnt while he's standing on the stone, do you think that someone is going to survive that? Like when you burn a pot. If there's anything in that pot, if you burn the pot, whatever's in the pot is also burnt. You put meat in the pot, and then you forget it, and all the water gets drained, evaporates out, and the fire is still going. What happens now? Everything in the pot now is burnt. Eventually the pot burns. Because the burn temperature of the flesh is much lower than the pot. The pot is simply transferring the heat. Same thing with stone. The temperature at which stone burns is much higher than the temperature at which our bodies would burn. The whole mountain is burnt. All 70 of those who came with Musa alayhi salam die. Musa alayhi salam simply faints. If he was like the mountain, he would have been burnt with the mountain. And if he was like those 70, he would have died with those 70. But he's neither like the mountain nor like the 70. He is the Prophet of Allah. And here, again, Musa alayhi salam is Kalimullah, Rasulullah is Habibullah. Musa, it is a source of pride for Musa alayhi salam to have a master and leader like a Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is nur. Bashar, or humanity, is simply a characteristic of his. For us, it's the other way around. Our reality is that we are human. But if we connect ourselves to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we can attain some characteristics of the nur. When you look in the Quran, there are 3 entities that refer to a prophet as Bashar. In the whole Quran, only 3 entities. Either Allah, or the Prophet themselves refer to themselves as Bashar, or the kuffar, the disbelievers. You don't find any place in the Quran where any of the believers are referring to their prophets as Bashar. It's one thing to be Bashar, it's another thing for someone to insist that you are Bashar. Everyone here, their father is a man. No one goes around, or at least no one should be going around calling their father, hey man. Of course, these things, everything's backwards. But that's the reality, is that no one's going to be referring, hey man, what are you doing? No. Even though he is a man. The same way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his sifat, one of his characteristics is bashar. But the only people who called him bashar in the Quran that were humans other than the prophets themselves are the kuffar. Because again, saying one thing and being one thing are two different things. In the Quran, Yunus alayhi salam, what does he say? La ilaha illa anta inni kuntum min al-zalimin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntum min al-zalimin. So inni kuntum min al-zalimin, he's talking about himself, that I am from the oppressors, the zalim. If anyone says that Yunus alayhi salam is zalim, is kafir. Even though he's calling himself zalim. But if anyone else call him zalim, we are kafir. You know, there's always that level of adab that is demanded by Allah, especially for His Habib, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are other technical aspects of the verse, but these are just basic things. You know, it's interesting, you know, if you look at the beginning of the verse, it starts off with hamd. The end of the verse ends with negation of shirk. And there's, you know, if we go into that, it'll take extra time, which I don't want to do right now. But the point I want to make here also, so you have the connection from the beginning of the verse to the end, beginning of the surah to the end of the surah. You also always have a connection from one surah to the next surah. So this surah ends with قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. Okay. One point here also to make is that, yes, we are similar to him, but in what? And he tells us in what. So what are we similar to him? You know, and to understand this, it's like having two brothers. One of them becomes very wealthy and powerful. The other one, sweeps the streets. One day the powerful brother is driving, or he's being chauffeured by in his Rolls Royce. And he stops, he sees his brother, sweeping the streets. And he stops and he says to his brother, he says, you never come and visit me. And the poor brother, he says, what do we have in common? If I come to visit you, it'll be an insult to you. He says, no, we're both the same. So then, again, the poor brother, he says, one of your socks is more expensive than one of my suits. The food you eat, compared to the food that I eat, there's no comparison. The amount of money you spend in one day is like 2 years' salary for me. What do we have in common? And the other brother, he says, look, yeah, that all may be true, but at least we have the same mother. In this verse, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell Rasulullah say? قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. So right then, that demarcation takes place. Yuha, that I receive revelation. None of us receives revelation. And if we claim to be receiving revelation, it's from shaitan. But he tells us what we are similar. إِنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. That our Lord is the same. This is what makes us similar to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or makes him similar to us, is that we have the same Lord, the same Creator. Everything else about him is different. Everything else. You start thinking, and you don't have to think far. For us, 5 arkan, 5 pillars of Islam. For him, 4. Because it's impossible for him to give zakat. Because when you give zakat, it goes out of your jurisdiction. You have to give it to someone where you can't say, oh, do this with it. You have no authority over it anymore. Rasulullah ﷺ is given authority over all of creation. If he tells anybody to spend his wealth in whatever way, he has to spend it in that manner. For us, 5 daily prayers. For him, 6, the hajjud as well. And this was something he brought for himself. Even the obligations on him are his authority. When we sweat, we stink. His sweat better than musk, to the extent that the companions would mix it with their ithar to make it smell better. There was a companion of Rasulullah ﷺ, his daughter was about to get married. He was very poor, didn't have the money to even buy any perfume. So he comes to Rasulullah ﷺ. Rasulullah ﷺ takes some of his sweat and gives it to him. When it was put on the bride, the whole house became fragrant, to the extent that anybody going by would smell and they would know this is that house. Not only the bride, but generations after that, that fragrance kept coming. Our blood is impure. The ones who drank his blood became haram for the fire of hell to touch them. And when they were martyred, and their flesh was set aside, and I'm going to skip over a lot of things, but we know this. What happened with Abdullah ibn Zubair radiallahu anhu? Smell better than musk. Everything about him is different. I mean, the list, goes on and on. But I just want to draw attention to one thing now, having said all of this. There's a so-called world-renowned scholar who visited Atlanta recently. He's now a vlogger traveling the world as well. So he was also in Swani Masjid and some other masajid and Islamic Institute, and he came all these places, and everybody just frothing over him. This guy, so frothing over him like he's somebody. And so recently he makes this statement. And the statement he makes is that he says, see, Rasulullah didn't know how to read or write. And so when revelation would come, he would call a scribe and they would write it. He would recite the verse and they would write it down. But sometimes they would make mistakes in the writing, grammatical mistakes. And those mistakes are still here today because Rasulullah didn't even know they had made a mistake. Tariq Masood is his name, if you want to look him up. So Rasulullah didn't know they made a mistake, and so those grammatical mistakes are even coming down even today. And he recites a verse, and he sees this is 100% grammatically wrong. And the interesting thing is, if you look at those verses, these are the same verses that many of the Christians and non-Muslims try to attack the Quran on. And these have been debunked from the beginning of time. But you have to look at the ideology, because now he's claiming, people are saying, see, he made tawbah. I listened to his tawbah as well. His tawbah was that if I hurt anyone's feelings with what I said, maybe I should have used different wording. And I'll show you a clip if you want to see that too. It's not a tawbah. There is no tawbah without the wasila of Rasulullah. But in order for him to say this, this is why I keep saying ideology drives the politics. Ideology and reality drives everything. Even if you don't know much, but if you're connected with that love of Allah and His Messenger, that will be your protection. It will always lead you to the right way. And you can know a ton and quote books and the Quran and everything else, but if that is not your connection, then it doesn't matter. But in order for him to say this, his ideology has to be that he considers Rasulullah like anyone else, Otherwise, he couldn't have said this. That is number one, that he considers Rasulullah sallallahu like anyone else. And then he considers the Quran like any other book. And he considers Allah like any other of these deities. That is the only way he could have said this. And of course, when he's apologizing, because now he's afraid that somebody might take him out, or he's afraid that he's going to lose revenue from people won't listen to his vlogs anymore. Not because he never addresses the point. It's I've given my apology. That's it. Be happy with it. Literally, that's literally what he says. But it's not only him. This is again a mufti, a so-called scholar. His teachers are indirectly defending him. The catch here is when you say something like that, you've exited Islam. The only way one of the first steps in tawbah is to say the kalma with the intention of coming back into Islam. You can say the kalma a million times, but if you don't say it with that intention, you're not Muslim anymore. This is why the British pushed this ideology, or the colonial powers pushed this ideology in the Muslim lands. Was that we think of Rasulullah sallallahu like we think of anyone else. Because once we start thinking that way, first of all, the help of Allah goes, it leaves. And then that path takes us down a road that you can never recover from. I'll end here, inshallah, today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us and fill our hearts with His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all of those whom they love. May He give strength and victory and to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine and wherever the Muslims and people are being oppressed over their oppressors. May He protect us from the shar and the fitna of these so-called scholars who talk about and try to propagate the concept that Rasulullah ﷺ is like us, which they mean that they are like him. And may He protect us from all of this. Those who have not made sunnah, go and make sunnah.